Hello, everyone. We're going to give it just a minute to give people time to come in. And we have Samantha Conklin here with us. And we haven't got to do a webinar with INFINITEC for a bit, so we're thrilled about that. So we'll give it just maybe another minute and we'll get started.
Okay, sounds good. And I think, Megan, you may have to share for the chat because it's giving me the option to share with hosts and panelists or to share directly with you.
I will fix that. We've had some trouble with that. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started because I want to make sure Samantha has all the time to get through all of her slides as well as answer any questions that come up. We are excited that we get to partner with INFINITEC for 2 webinars here in April and then another probably later in the summer. And if you haven't gotten to hear INFINITEC share information, you will be thrilled once you get going. And there's just an incredible resource for Illinois families around AT. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Samantha, and you will see in the chat here, if you don't already, in a minute, she has posted her slides. I'm going to post those in a way that you're able to see them so that you have access to all of the links. I don't want you to worry about that as you go through, that you might not have access to links. And Samantha, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Megan. And thank you so much for having me for this lunch hour webinar, Bust the Myths and Demystify the Facts Related to Assistive Technology. We're going to look at some key resources to address questions and considerations that are really very whole team friendly, not just for families, but they're good for, I really feel, the entire IEP team that's looking at assistive technology. So thanks to all of you for spending the next hour with me. As Megan shared, my name is Samantha Conklin. I'm an assistive technology facilitator that works for INFINITEC. As Megan shared, she dropped the link to the slides in the handout. You're welcome to use this QR code to access it as well. I really do like the option to share a set of slides with you as we go through these different slides. There are a few of those really good resources that are linked within this presentation. So if you have the link to the slide, then you also have the outside link to those resources. So you are welcome to share with others, members of your child's IEP team, or other parents and colleagues that you feel would benefit from this information as well. Um, as Megan shared, my name is Samantha. I'm an assistive technology facilitator that works for an organization called INFINITEC. INFINITEC is a nonprofit based in the Chicago suburbs that focuses in on working with classroom teams to support the use of assistive technology for students. So we may collaborate with teams, work with them through the assessment process, but we also provide a lot of professional development for families, for educators, for SLPs focused in on that area of assistive technology. And we at INFINITEC are fortunate enough to have a grant through the Illinois State Board of Education that allows us to provide that professional development and collaborate with teams throughout the entire state. And it's accessible to all at no cost. So the resources that we have a website at the end of the session that I'll share. All of that PD and those resources are really open to everyone throughout the state to have access to really gain that knowledge to help support the use of assistive technology. So before I get started, if you could just drop in the chat a little about you. I'm assuming most of you are parents. If you are not parents, could you let me know kind of what your role on the team is? Also, if you could let me know the age or grade level of your child. I think those pieces are helpful. So I kind of have an idea of where you are in your experience within that IEP process.
Sam, if they have trouble with that, I can't tell what the access to the chat is for everybody. So if they have trouble with that, they can just send it to the host and I'll do exactly what I just did and I'll put it back out for you.
Okay, excellent. That would be fantastic. So if you could go ahead, enter it into the chat or get it to the host in some way, that would be excellent. So I'll give about 20 seconds if you guys could enter that information. And then Megan, if you could share, that would be excellent.
Okay, Sam, I don't see it coming through and that may be a tech issue or it may just be folks aren't typing in. Do you want me to allow just people to introduce themselves briefly or what's your preference?
I'm thinking too, even time-wise, um, you know what? If folks could just maybe introduce themselves very briefly, if you're able to turn on the audio for folks.
Sure.
And if not, that's okay as well. We could skip through, but if that would work just to do a quick introduction, that would be excellent.
I'll just work through everybody individually.
Okay.
And if you do not speak up, I'm going to assume you're not comfortable speaking up and it's okay. I will call
And
your
that's
name.
okay. 100%. If you would rather pass, you can rate that in the chat as well. We know people might be in the middle, they might be in the workplace, and they might just be listening. You might be driving in your car, whatever. If there's a way for some reason, if you do not want to share that information, absolutely fine. So you're welcome to go ahead, Megan.
Cindy, I've got you given you permission to talk if you want to introduce yourself. Cindy's staying muted, so I'm thinking she can't. Deanna? Nope. Moving on. Ellen? We may just be taking people by surprise here soon.
Yeah, and you know what? And then we could go ahead if more folks are quiet and want to skip, that's fine. If you want to do an introduction in some way, feel free to touch base with Megan, and we're happy to do that. If you have questions or direct things, and you do not want to enter them in the chat, my email will be at the end. So no, that's another way to communicate with me as well. So we will just plug away and move forward just so we could get through the content of today.
And Sam, just so everybody knows, the Q&A box works, so they can use the Q&A box at the end to ask you any questions if they want to do that, so that they can access that with the three dots over to the right.
Okay, awesome. Excellent.
All right,
Thank you so
thanks.
much, Megan. So, as we go through, we are going to start with the lens and thinking about technology and what we know and how it's used educationally, as well as how it is used for us on a day-to-day basis. We know for most of us, technology makes things easier. It makes life a little bit more efficient and effective. And we think right now of all the tools that we have access to in our immediate environment. One-to-one devices, our iPhones, Androids, whatever system you use, it's something that's intertwined and integrating through a lot of our life activities, right? We use those things to support and make our communication more efficient and effective, to access calendars, keep us organized. There are a number of uses that we really look at technology, and it really supports things in our life to make things easier. But what we do know for a person with a disability, it makes things possible. So when we look at those tools and technology, it really could make a huge difference in regard to how individuals with disabilities can participate within their community settings, the curriculum they could access at school, and can make a very significant difference in what they're able to do within those activities. So, as we look at those pieces and we reflect upon technology, for our individuals with disabilities, it can be something called assistive technology. And assistive technology is something that does come across on a regular basis, or at least should for most kids. So when we look at that piece too, we're looking at the idea of assistive technology and thinking your mind, is assistive technology a luxury support? We know within that school setting, we're really looking at that idea of students, do need to receive a free and appropriate education. And we think about the academic services they need to receive. For some students, they might also need those related services, such as speech, occupational therapy, physical therapy, social work. But when we look at the field of assistive technology, we need to know it also does fall into those areas. It is not a luxury. Assistive technology is something, devices and services are required for some students, and may be necessary for students to receive a free and appropriate education. So, in fact, when we look at that field of assistive technology, providing AT devices and services, of course, is something that, it's optimal, but it is not optional for kids. If the IEP team comes together and says this is an educational need, providing AT devices and services is something that is required for some students to receive a free and appropriate education. So, given that myth that assistive technology is something that could be optional, and knowing the facts as they relate to the law, um, it was the Office of Special Education Programs, now it's under the U.S. Department of Education, came out with what was supposed to be some new legislation back in January of 2024. So, about 6 months before, buzz in the assistive technology field was going around, oh, there's going to be new legislation coming out to assistive technology. There's going to be new laws. Everyone's waiting to see what's changing. So, in January, a document was released that really looked at assistive technology. And I'm going to come out of my slides for a minute. And the document that was released was this brief 20-page pamphlet entitled The Myths and Facts Surrounding Assistive Technology Devices and Services. Now, this document, in fact, did not provide any new legislation, but what it did was it took the legislation that was, currently there, currently written, and really made it a very digestible document. So this particular document is about 20 pages in length, but really took a lot of those myths that were associated with assistive technology and shared and broke down what the facts really are about AT devices and services, and gave, in addition to that fact and myth, gave a little background regarding the law and regarding some of those evidence-based practices as well. So I'm just going to scan through really quickly so you could see for a quick minute what this document looks like. So they break it down into different sections related to AT. But when you simply looked at the facts and the myths, it is brief, it is a condensed version, and it's very concise. But the purpose is that this document addresses a lot of those myths, and it is written in language that someone that's not familiar with assistive technology or the law can understand it and can understand how it impacts kids in the classroom. So that really is the very supportive thing. So all members of the IEP team can really look at this document and have the same interpretation of the law. So even for paraprofessionals, general educators, folks that are new to that field AT, this was really a revolutionary piece because it took all that legislation and put it in terms that everyone could be on the same page and everyone could have the same conclusion about. So it really was a very nice document. And if you go into the slides or have that linked, it is linked directly from the title of this slide on top. So everyone has access to that document. So looking at that facts and myths document, we're going to take a look at some of those myths that they address, and how they relate to assistive technology and how it's implemented within the schools for students. So for the first piece, I want everyone just to think for a minute. When you hear the term assistive technology, if you could close your eyes and picture one thing in your head, what do you visualize? So thinking about that moment, what is it that you actually visualize when you hear assistive technology? So very often, folks will hear technology, and the term technology very often implies computerized devices. So when we are looking at the field of assistive technology, think about fact or myth. An assistive technology, or AT, if you're looking at the acronym, device is defined as any equipment with a power supply that supports students' learning. Is that a fact or myth? So looking at this question, does assistive technology only include those things with power supplies? What we do know when we look at that statement that's often made is that the law defines assistive technology as any device, an assistive technology device, I should say, as any item, piece of equipment, or product system, whether commercially off the shelf, modified, or customized, that is used to increase, maintain, or improve the functional capabilities of a child with a disability. So when we look and we break down that definition, it gives us a few more specified pieces of information. So when we look at assistive technology, it can be any item. It can be what people picture as those high-tech devices, a computer, a Chromebook, an iPad. But it also can include low-tech tools. It can include pencil grips that might be purchased from a specialized store or things that might be created with classroom materials. It can be things like low-tech visual supports. It could include any item, high, mid, or low tech. It can include individual items or items that work together as a product system. So if a student has visual impairments and they need something magnified, they might use a system such as what's pictured. They might use a computer in conjunction with software on that computer to enlarge a textbook or an article, in conjunction with a magnifier that's connected to that computer. You need those three pieces as part of a system in order for it to be effective for a child. It can be something you acquire commercially off the shelf, or that's something that's modified or customized. So think for a minute, if you order a Chromebook on Amazon, and a student has difficulty with their fine motor skills. When they use a pencil or paper to write, the writing is not legible. But when they type, very obviously, they're getting that printed text produced by the computer. So the impact of those fine motor skills doesn't affect what they produce anymore. So students are able to then complete writing a paragraph, and it is legible if they are using that Chromebook. If that student must have that Chromebook that could be purchased from Amazon or Best Buy, it can be considered assistive technology for that particular child. So it can be something you buy commercially. Or it could be something that you take and modify or customize. So, for example, for a lot of the students that use communication devices to help support if they are nonverbal, or have difficulties with speech, they may use software that is on an iPad that is programmed with messages that's specific to them. So that's something that they are purchasing, that iPad, but then they're adding the apps and they're changing and customizing the vocabulary so it matches the student's needs. Whether it be high to low tech, off the shelf, customized, really the most important piece is that main goal is that technology is that tool is really being used to increase, maintain, or improve the functional capabilities of a child with a disability. So if a student needs to use that tool in order to be able to complete the task, their performance changes. They can't do it without that tool, then it is considered assistive technology for that child. So it can be any of those factors, but the main goal really stays the same to increase, maintain, or improve the functional capabilities. So when we look at that document, Facts and Myth has addressed a couple facts and myths related to that area. One being the myth that assistive technology is always high tech. When the fact is that AT can be no or low tech, it can be mid tech, or it can be high tech. It includes all of those qualifiers. The additional piece looking at that is that AT is expensive. And some AT still is expensive. If you're looking at high-end, very customized, individualized devices or equipment, it can be. But the fact really is that some AT could be no cost. It could be something that is designed or fashioned with materials that are already available. It can be something that is minimal cost, or it can range up into that expensive range. So it's a whole range, just like that definition provides. So that really is scooped in the first piece of the assistive technology, as it is defined in the law. The second piece looks at the legal definition of assistive technology includes devices and services. So think in your head, we won't do it out loud, but just think to yourself, is the legal definition that it includes devices or services, is that a fact or a myth? Okay, so I know everyone has their answer in their head. And in fact, that is a fact. We know it is a myth that providing only a device meets the IDEA requirements. The fact really is IDEA or the law requires that devices and supporting services are provided for students. So when we look, as just as there was that legal definition of an assistive technology device, there's also a legal definition of assistive technology services. That's the other piece. Because what we know is that you could give a child a tool, a device, a piece of equipment, but if they aren't able to use that tool effectively, it's not going to be functional. It's not going to help them improve or increase or maintain that goal, to move forward and progress. We know that service, just like everything else within education for students, is the key component. So, an assistive technology service is also defined to mean any service that directly assists a child with a disability in the selection, acquisition, or use of an assistive technology device. So services include things like evaluation or assessment for assistive technology. So part of the services is really deciding what tool matches the student's needs. It is providing the device. So the district acquiring the tool and getting it in the hands of the student. It includes all those customization components, selecting, designing, fitting, customizing, adapting, applying, maintaining, repairing, or replacing assistive technology devices. So really getting the tool, individualizing it for the child, and making sure that tool is in good working order and moving forward, so the student can access the use of that assistive technology. Services include the coordination of and use of assistive technology with other therapies. So, for example, if a student receives occupational therapy services because they have difficulty with fine motor skills, and the student, in fact, that occupational therapist is working with the assistive technology team to go through and determine, what software and a computer might help them be more independent or make more progress in the area of writing. That occupational therapist may go through and then coordinate the use of that assistive technology with the special educator, with the general educator to make sure that the student is able to very functionally use that computer when they are writing in their classroom. And then also and probably one of the most important components that's considered a service for assistive technology is training. So making sure all members of the classroom team or all members of the team really have the training that's needed to support the student and for the student to be successful when using the assistive technology tools and strategies. So any questions on those legal definitions about assistive technology devices and services? We're going to delve into a few more specific myths relative to those areas, more specifically the area of assistive technology service. Megan, if there are any questions that do pop in the Q&A or the chat, will you let me know?
We have one question.
Okay,
You want to go ahead with
excellent.
that?
Yep.
This is from a parent of an adult who is 42 with Down syndrome who is asking for speech, ways to be understood more, knows of his communication issues, in parentheses, soft voice. So he's asking for help.
Okay, and that's something we have. If you are able to stay on and connect at the end of the session, since that's a very specific consumer question, a specific question for your child, we do have a couple options that are available or resources that I could connect you with directly that would be able to support. So I will go ahead and I could send some of those your way. If you want to stay on at the end for a quick second, I'd be happy to get those to you.
Thanks, Sam. And that's the only one we have right in there right now. Yep.
Okay, perfect. So I'll continue on, but feel free to unmute, feel free to enter those, and we'll address them as they come. So when we look at some of those facts or myths related to the surfaces, the next one, is this a fact or myth? Assistive technology is only considered for students with the most complex learning needs. Fact or myth? So everyone's thinking in their head. And what we know, even though assistive technology is very often, people hear assistive technology and they do think of those AAC or those communication devices for kids. And in the past, during IEP meetings, there was sometimes the thought that assistive technology should only be considered for certain students. And this was really looking at those students that had the most complex learning needs. But in fact, we know that assistive technology must be considered for all children with IEPs. So when you look at assistive technology consideration, and they use that term, what they are talking about is at your child's IEP meeting, um, the team should come together and talk about assistive technology in a very collaborative way. To say, hey, this student does not need assistive technology. They're currently making progress on goals and things are moving forward. Or, yes, we do need to talk about assistive technology more in depth, and the student may need to try something. So, this should be a conversation that is taking place at every IEP meeting annually at minimum. It can happen more often, but the minimum requirement is that it's happening at every IEP meeting. And so the team will review the existing information that's there and really decide, do we need to collect other information? Are we good to go? But really deciding before gathering that information to know if AT is needed for the child to receive a free and appropriate education. So based upon that dialogue at that IEP meeting, then the decision is written in a child's IEP. So on every IEP, you'll see there is a little area in that consideration of special factors that focuses in on asking about assistive technology devices and or services. If yes, please specify the needed AT. Um, and when you say the needed AT, you note that any AT that is documented that the team believes the student needs is documented in that area, even if the district's providing a one-to-one device. So, as I said previously, if the team decides that the child must have that Chromebook for writing tasks, even if the district says that every student in the district has a Chromebook, they still need to document it in the child's IEP here. And I say that for the fact of if you move into a new district and that district doesn't have one-to-one Chromebooks, if the following school year the district decides, oh, we're not going to use Chromebooks anymore, instead we're going to use an iPad, and that doesn't meet the same needs for a student, it is so important that that device is documented in the child's IEP. And the other component too, when it is documented in the child's IEP, it is very important for teams. They should not list the specific brand or name of the device, but instead list very descriptive factors or features. So if a student is using an AAC device, they should not say an iPad with touch chat software in there. They should say a device with a dynamic display that has spoken output that a student can directly select or directly touch a button to access that language. So they should write it so that it's very specific to the features or describes what that child needs. So that should be listed in there. And the other piece to consider, if your child does not need AT, they may do great with the current interventions. They might do great with the current modifications, and assistive technology is not needed. So that should also be specified why it's not needed. And it might say because Billy is currently making progress on educational goals and accessing the curriculum with the current listed accommodations and modifications. So that is okay to say too. As long as you list for the yes or the no, why. So when we looked at services, the next fact or myth, questionable statement we're going to look at is the following. In order for a student to access any type of assistive technology in the classroom, the team must have completed an assistive technology evaluation for the student. Is that a fact or a myth? So before the team can go ahead and provide a child with a device or give them access to any technology, the student must have an evaluation. Okay, so everyone's thinking in their head, is that statement a fact or a myth? And the truth is that it is a myth that an assistive technology evaluation is required prior to providing AT. The fact is that an AT evaluation can be included, but it is not required. So this is really an important component of what we know about assistive technology in making decisions for kids. And so what I always like to tell families we're working with, different schools have different policies and procedures. So I always say if you are asking about assistive technology for your child, directly ask your administration or your student's case manager, what is the district's process for deciding if assistive technology is needed for a student? So they should have a specific process put into place. Some districts will say we do an evaluation. Other districts will say we gather data or do an assessment. So it could be two different things. And the terminology is slightly different. The important piece is that the team is going to be trying different tools and strategies and collecting data to see if it is a match for a student. So I say that's really the important piece. Different districts have different policies or procedures. Um, some districts do an evaluation. They will open up a domain and start that process. Other places do not do that. But they have a strict policy and procedure of we're going to try a device. We are going to collect data about the student's progress with this device and if it to determine if it's a match. So I always say directly ask what the district's process is because it can vary. And I don't say one's not better for the other, but that very important component is that they're trialing different tools and collecting data about progress. That's the key piece. So when you look at that, districts will say we're going to do an assistive technology assessment. So that's really the piece that's really not as formal. It's not necessarily related to doing a reevaluation or opening a domain. It's really a way of just collecting information about the student's special needs, strengths, interests. Can include giving individual tests, observing the student, looking at records, talking with his or her parents. So you're doing a lot of information gathering. Data collection should be one of them with the tool that they are trialing. So that piece is really good for the assistive technology as long as they're gathering that accurate information and all team members are involved in the process. Some districts will say we're doing an evaluation, which really looks at opening up that domain in the paperwork, and it becomes a more formalized process that involves the IEP team. There was another question I could see, Megan, that popped in the Q&A.
You're too sick to go
Okay,
ahead and
Julie
answer
asked,
those.
yep, trying tools and collecting data. Is that the district policy or an IEP or 504 requirement? What should be looked for with data collection? That's a very good question, Julie. So it is not, I always say it should be part of the district policy. They should have something set up when they're talking about their assistive technology evaluation when you ask about their services. I have never known for a district not to be taking some type of data and progress related to student performance on that, because then if there's differing opinions, and things move forward, it's always that data that people go and rely back on when they're making those decisions. With data collection, what I like to tell folks to do, if you're looking at a specific tool for assistive technology, most times. Um, that tool relates to a student's IEP goal, right? Because those IEP goals should be those priorities for instruction or intervention or what's going forward, or those areas of difficulty or challenges for students. So I say really think back to those IEP goals. So very often teams should be already collecting data on those IEP goals and have a set of baseline data or baseline information to say, hey, this is the student performance relative to this goal or task. And then you add in that assistive technology, and you should be collecting that same information. But sometimes it's not. So it varies as to what tool, what area, what task you're trying. And it really depends on what the team comes together. I always say this is consideration, assessment, evaluation, whatever term you're using. When you're deciding on assistive technology for a child, it is a whole team decision. It's a collaborative process. So parents, related service, special educator, general educator, sometimes even the student has input onto what information they should be collecting to say if something works or not. I always get student input. It may not be part of the formalized data collection, but ways that they think it's working or not working. It may be more general, but they'll give you their insights many times. But I really say that data could be very specific to if the student's doing a writing task or student's doing, if it's something relative to communication. So Julie, if you have more specific pieces that you're looking at ways to do data collection, there is a guide. I'd be happy to email it to you too. And it's kind of old school. It's called How Do You Know It? How Do You Show It? And it really gives some good examples of collecting data relative to assistive technology in a few different areas. So that's something I'll write the name of the guide in the chat. Oh, thanks, Megan. You already did that. Look at that. But if that's something you need, you are welcome to email me, and I'd be happy to share that link or that guide directly with you. And it really does talk about looking at various team members' input. So I know that was a really long answer, but it's a really complicated question because you could collect data in so many different ways based upon the task the student's doing, if it relates to their IEP goals, who's collecting the data even. So it's really variable, but it really should be making sure the important thing is that it's potentially could show student progress. Okay, yep, I will gladly. And if you even stand at the end, Julie, I could track that link down really quickly for you too. So I'm going to move on to the next factor myth. Looking at that idea of assessment or evaluation, assistive technology decision making, we'll call it. Is it this a fact or myth? A certified assistive technology professional or an ATP must conduct the assistive technology assessment or evaluation. Is that a fact or a myth? This is one I always like. Okay, people are thinking about that piece. And as I had mentioned previously, thinking about the important piece, no matter who is involved, the who's responsible for AET decision making, it should be the entire team. So the first piece we know is that it should not be one assistive technology facilitator, evaluator, consultant making a decision for a student. The responsibility falls as the IEP team as a whole. I go out and I do directly work with teams to help them in the process of making decisions about assistive technology for kids. And what I do inevitably every time at the beginning, before I even see the student, I talk directly with the team. And I always say, whatever team members are available that are open to join, please have them. We do even a quick Zoom at the beginning to get information about the student, strengths, needs, their current levels of performance. If it's a skill like writing, I may get some good input or evaluative information from an OT, but also an educator to give me more specified background on that information. So it really is a full team decision. I get information from the parents. What difficulties do they see when the students are working at homework on home? What has the student reported to them? I talk to the student. What's easy for you when you have to do writing assignments? What's challenging? So gathering all that information, so you're making a very well-formed decision. So first of all, it's not just one person, it's the entire team that is involved with making this decision. And secondly, the other piece within that IEP team, um, you may or may not have an assistive technology professional as part of that team. What IDEA says, it requires that a qualified individual um, is part of that discussion or dialogue. So you may have an educator, you may have an SLP that is part of that IEP team that is incredibly well versed in assistive technology. Um, Before I came back, I've been with INFINITEC on and off for 25 years. But 5 years ago, I was a classroom teacher. And I knew a lot about assistive technology because I had been doing this for 20 years prior. I went back and took a classroom because I missed direct service with kids. So when we would talk about assistive technology, all the team members, the related service, the general educator, the parents, the families, they were okay with making these decisions about assistive technology because for the majority of those decisions, I did have a lot of knowledge or background. Yet, if we were talking about something like power mobility for a student that needed a wheelchair, I am not a qualified individual to be making that decision. In a case like that, there would need to be an outside person that would need to come join our IEP team, kind of an adjunct member, that would help lead that dialogue about options in that area so that myself, the physical therapist, the family, we could all work together to make a decision for a child. So it really is not specific to the credentials behind a person's name. It really comes down to that knowledge to make that person a qualified individual, that they have that knowledge or that experience in that area. So there may or may not be an AT facilitator or AT professional that becomes part of that IEP team. Okay, so our next fact or myth regarding assistive technology. Okay, so this is a little more of a scenario. We're going to think for a minute. So, Joey's a young man. He's diagnosed with dyslexia, and his IEP team has come together. They have data documenting that he has been successful in independently reading long amounts of text. He's increased his independence in doing so with the use of text to speech or the computer reading aloud that text. So, knowing that if Susie's also diagnosed with dyslexia, she's going to show that same progress and she automatically needs to get text to speech. Is that a fact or a myth? Okay, so in thinking about those two scenarios, we know in fact that is a myth. Assistive technology tool selection um, should be individualized to meet a child's specific needs. It is a myth that it should not be. If students have the same diagnoses, if they have the same test scores, if they have the same profile, could they have similar assistive technology tools? Absolutely. Could they have completely different assistive technology tools? Absolutely. The team really needs to go through that decision-making process on a level that is specific to the child's needs. Because very often, what they might find, a student that does have a learning disability, some students may have struggles in the area of decoding or fluency, and that text to speech might be a great support. But then there might be a second child that also needs a vocabulary support in there. So just giving that child that text to speech may not be enough. They might need to have more, they might need to have additional features on that tool or technology to help them be independent. So that's what I always say. It is so critically important to make sure that you are going in and individualizing for the child's needs. looking at another student, could it give you an example or an idea or a feature that might be helpful? Yes, it could open doors to starting that dialogue with a team. Very often you'll see, even when I was in the classroom, there would be tools that I might initially start using with one student to try. And then I have a second student that's looking over going, oh, what is this? Could it's, and I might be like, oh, let's try this with Billy as well. We might start to try our experiment or play with a little bit because even though we're not officially doing that evaluation yet, I could still put assistive technology in a child's hands to see or get some feedback or information. And that might send a light bulb in my mind and say, hey, yeah, this child also needs to do an assistive technology. They need to go through that decision-making process. But the result could be very different than that initial child that is using a tool. So it is so very critically important that children are individually assessed, evaluated when you're looking at assistive technology. And each child takes that team, goes through that process that's specific to that child. Okay, so the next area we're going to look at, is this a fact or a myth? In regard to some of those assistive technology services, specifically training. If all school staff have received training on assistive technology, the district has met the responsibility regarding training. Is that a fact or a myth? Think about that for one moment. I hope everyone on here is shouting absolutely not. That is definitely a myth. And it is a myth twofold. The myth comes into play that sometimes people think, oh, we have trained the SLP, we have trained the classroom teacher, but we're going to put the device in the hands of the child and they're going to be expected to use it. And I've even heard people say, oh, kids right now, they're very native to technology. They could figure out things much more quickly than the older generations, which in part is true. But as we know as well, the things they could figure out very often have to do with social media, selfies, gaming. It may not necessarily be with how to use assistive technology to really improve their progress with academic tasks. So we need to keep in mind students still need to be taught how to use assistive technology. It may include training at the beginning before we give it to them. It may include developing prompting or intervention strategies to provide them feedback, ongoing feedback while they are using it for classroom activities. It is so critical that students have an understanding of how to use their tools and how to apply them correctly. So students really also do need that training support. Additionally, parents and families, I mean, without question, you're part of the IEP team. So when that training is provided for the IEP team, if you are able to go ahead and join and participate in that, that is a huge asset. Because we know you also having an understanding really to support your child as well is a huge thing into really resulting in the progress that they can make with that tool. So it is the entire IEP team, not just the school team, the entire IEP team that should receive training to move forward on the device. And we're looking at those things too. That's another piece that should be documented in that IEP under training supports and parent training or counseling. Okay, so we have a couple more regarding school and home use. So is this a fact or a myth? School and home environments should collaboratively support assistive technology access and use for students. And this should be a quick, yep, that better be a fact. Within the OSIP doc, there are a couple places where they address that crossover between assistive technology and home and school. So the first is looking at the myth of assistive technology devices and services are only for use at school. A child has a communication device, the district has purchased it, and it stays in that school environment. Or the student uses a computer with text to speech software that stays in the school environment. How do kids do homework that's related to the school environment? So really, you are looking at those tools. Assistive tech should be used across all environments to ensure the learner is supported. So that is something too that when assistive technology becomes part of a device and service that's listed on a child IEP, to have that direct conversation with the IEP team to say, hey, it's really exciting that my child is using text to speech to read novels at school, but they also have that for homework and they need to read it at home. That device will be coming home with the child so he could do that. Check in on those things and get that clarification. I think this really has improved greatly across districts because so many devices are one-to-one. Districts are one-to-one, and the students bring those devices to and from school. But really ensuring that fact that students have access to make progress on those IEP goals across environments. And the second myth related to that is looking at the school is less responsible if the child uses their own AT. So I think of this myth really relative to a lot of students that use augmentative and alternative communication, or their talkers to support speech. So sometimes parents will go through their own private insurance because these devices can be medically necessary, and they purchase the device for the child. And if that's it, a lot of families do prefer to do that. So they have access to, they go through, they're able to have the device in different environments and facilitate those things going forward. Um, but really, even if the parents provide and have that device, the school team still does need to document its use in the IEP and really make sure that the student is actively using it to make progress on their goals, even though it may be owned in the family. So it really works that other way as well. It's really important that students do have and are receiving those services to support that tool, even if it is something that's purchased by the family and provided by the family. So that SLP may or may not have helped write that funding letter to the insurance so the families can purchase it. But that SLP, either way, if they're using that AAC device, they're really helping to provide those services and implement it across the child's school day. So making sure things work both ways and the environment is collaborative because we know for our kids, generalizing across environments is a huge piece and a huge support. So when we look at our final area, facts and myths, there is research to support positive outcomes for students when using assistive technology, fact or myth. And you better believe, looking at those pieces, that is a fact that was addressed very clearly in that facts and myths document. There is a variety of research. And when you look through those myths in that document, if you have any questions about research that's in there, they do list some specific articles. If you're working with a team that sometimes questions things, AAC will hinder speech. We know that research has proven the opposite. Text to speech will hinder students from learning how to read. Nope, it won't do that as long as you're providing reading intervention. So looking at some of those pieces, that's another thing I always tell families, if you're looking for research, feel free to reach out because there are a few articles that we do have handy to support some of those facts about assistive technology outcomes. And the other piece too that I sometimes do hear when working with teams, using assistive technology lowers a child's motivation. So, if you give a child text to speech to support reading, they're either not going to learn how to read, which we know all depends upon providing good reading intervention, but we know it will actually increase their motivation because they're able to access that grade level content. That frustrating barrier is removed. So that's what a lot of the research regarding motivation really does show. Um, the the use of assistive technology really is more motivating for students because now they have gained access and participation that they didn't have before through the use of assistive technology. So we will end or quickly wrap up on this note. Really thinking about that idea. We know technology for us makes things easier, but for a person with a disability, it does make things possible. So knowing these pieces of information and really also having a couple pieces of guidance that you can access as well. So the other thing I do like to point out, as I shared previously, we at INFINITEC have a grant through the Illinois State Board of Education to provide resources in professional development throughout the state. So that is something that every state across the U.S. has. They have an AT program that can provide devices. ITAP is another organization based in Springfield that they do provide assistive technology equipment for rent. They provide some training. We at INFINITEC provide a tremendous amount of training as well as coaching. And in fact, we also have parent coaching that we do provide as well as a resource or service. But looking in that, if these are things that you are remotely interested in, a link to our website is at4il.org. And you'll see in going there, we have the option that lists free training. All of the training that we have is open to all. It is open to families. It is open to students to attend. It is open to administrators. It is open to educators, related service providers. Anyone throughout the state, as this is a grant provided through ISB, is open to attend any of the training that we have. Additionally, we do have some parent sections on just some of the basis of assistive technology. And one of the pieces I also do want to point out is that we have a section of parent webinars. And it was about 2 years ago, we had Gail Bowser, who's very well known in the field, do a Parents Proactive AT series for us that is listed here. That looks at a parent's proactive approach to assistive technology. My child might need help, might need AT. How do I ask for it? What part can I play in an assistive technology assessment? And we have AT, now what? So this is a few of these sessions that really are a great resource for parents, really that go more in depth than what I did. I just listed off some facts and myths, some resources to go forward. But if you're really thinking about assistive technology for your child, how do you start that dialogue with the school team? This is a resource that can help and support you as well.
Thank you, Sam.
Oh, you are
Go ahead.
very
I didn't mean
welcome.
to jump on top of you. I just wanted to make sure everybody had an opportunity to put more questions in the chat in case you wanted to do that.
Oh, perfect. Please enter those in. And just know on the last slide as well, there were a few resources that I went through and linked. And I saw Megan, thank you for putting the OSEP doc directly in the chat as well. But within the slides, if you click on it, if you have them open and click on any of these links, that myths and facts surrounding assistive technology devices and services from the U.S. Department of Education, that is where I pulled a lot of that content for those facts and myths. It's about a 20-page read, so it's not very intense, but it does a really great job of answering those frequently asked questions, saying what those facts are, and giving a brief rationale about them. Additionally, in Illinois, we have an Illinois Assistive Technology Guidance Manual, which is a little more in depth, but we do have a great FAQ document that is also linked on that page that breaks down some of those frequently asked questions and gives a nice, concise little answer. And a lot of the facts and myths slides that were shared today were from the Center on Inclusive Technology and Educational Systems. So there are some resources that are there as well. And as always, you are more than welcome. If you have questions about any of the content, if you are interested in any of the training, we also provide training for parent groups directly as well. So if you are involved in like a parent group in your area, we've went out to parent groups and we'll provide overviews of assistive technology. We'll talk about more specific tools to support reading that are very accessible to students. We've done things on like, hey, you have an iPad, here's some things that are already built in that you can access. So you are welcome to reach out to me if you have any interest in those as well. Or if you have questions, you're welcome to email me.
Julie, I noticed that you had made a mention that you're having trouble with chat. There's a setting issue on our end, but we can't fix it midway through, unfortunately. So you can put anything you'd like into the Q&A and we'll use it just like a chat.
Okay, and you are welcome. Folks are welcome to unmute. You're welcome to type in the chat if you have any other questions or comments.
Julie says, I have questions regarding AT for central auditory processing disorder.
Okay, Julie, did you have is it a more child-specific question or is it a general overall question? Is it a one-to-one question you have for later, or is it something for you think that would be for the good of the group?
I've turned your microphone on if you would like to talk, if that's easier.
Oh, you're looking if the auditory processing disorder is something that is audiologist specific. Um, from my lens, that I have been in the field for assistive technology for like 25 years now. I would absolutely 100% say that an audiologist that is familiar with assistive technology should be part of that IEP team when they are making that decision. Not necessarily, but I feel overall, stu specific areas related to like vision and hearing, or even like I don't want to say because I know it's not hearing. I know auditory processing is something different, but I would probably include that person as part of the IEP team, just because they are going to have very specific information when you start talking about possible tools, as well as identifying specifically what that child needs. I would definitely involve an audiologist that would be able to support the team with that. So again, it'd be a whole team decision, but really having that be one of those key players that would help. Oh, here's a good question. Okay, when there is a language deficit and an access issue, but the grades are good, can AT still be denied? Um, I would really say what a lot of what it comes down to is that consideration conversation during the IEP meeting, um, looking at the students' areas of difficulty. And I mean, I really think it looks at grades can be good, but good, I think, is a very subjective um, measure too. So I really think it would have to go along the lines of gathering some data. And I always say most teams, it's definitely worth trialing assistive technology and doing tasks with and without, and really making that database decision. Just because I say you it's really a database decision. So I don't think assistive technology, I think there needs to be a consideration discussion at that IEP meeting, looking relative to progress with the curriculum and progress within those students' goals, um, and determining and really looking with or without that tool to see. So I would really say along the lines of doing a trial and gathering some data to make an official determination if assistive technology is that educational need. Does that help at all, Julie? I know it's so tricky when there's a different, not necessarily having all the pieces.
Yes, no, that helps very much. I will reach out. I have more questions that I think could be one-on-one based.
Okay.
But no, I think that gives me a good general kind of direction.
Okay. And the other piece too, I would yeah, and we might talk more specific after, but would be really looking. I always like to put people through and really encourage them to go through more of that data-driven lens. Um, just because sometimes when you have a lot of players involved with different pieces, um, folks' definition of what task you're targeting may be slightly different. What people are considering and defining as appropriate progress or measures may be slightly different. So I really think looking at defining those pieces and really gathering some good information and data makes things very objective. So I'm a person of always going to the data. It's good to gather some of that qualitative information in those pieces that does play a factor. But I think really making those data driven decisions is very often what's kind of is the defining factor for that piece. So yes,
No,
if you have more specific questions or things, I'd be happy to kind of give you some
I do.
guidance or resources.
And then I was gonna say too, another thing that I know we're struggling with, and I don't know if it'd be a benefit to anybody else, is the talk to text closed captioning. Finding software programs that work and the process for identifying that would be an area that I would be interested in hearing more information about.
Are you talking about like the new features, even that the iPad has right now?
Um, just any in general. So with my, I mean, maybe mine's be getting specific, but with my son, we started a process last year, ran into this year with trying to identify, and he's at a transition age, tools for him, like age appropriate moving forward for like listening in the classroom based on like all his language-based deficits coming together. So the auditory processing, um, hearing what's going on, hearing a teacher speaking, hearing a group, like kind of
Hmm.
identifying appropriate tools. So right now they were working to find a program for him in a classroom to hear what was going on. Um, while the teacher was speaking to kind of like closed caption to help him build with vocabulary and the listening, but it was picking up too much.
Oh, so you need like one of the, almost like a noise canceling, like the teacher would need to be wearing noise canceling microphone. So only her voice would get projected to the
Yeah.
device that would be producing
Yeah.
the captions.
And so even with like assistive technology and working in a team scope, even sitting at the table with the team, like I think there's stigma with understanding of the specific condition and its comorbidities, plus identifying who as a player on the team holds responsibilities for what. So I don't know if anybody else has gone through like the IEP process of doing these things or identifying tech, but I think as far as like quote unquote qualified individuals, I think sometimes sitting down as a group, it's even difficult to identify the individual and what their responsibilities are when there's overlap.
Yes, and I think that's a good piece too. And I always say for even for the opening dialogue, and I know sometimes it's hard, but I think a lot of people like to do it. I always appreciate the more the merrier. When you're in that initial information gathering process and you really look at bringing different components to the table. Just because like things, especially like with auditory processing disorder, like those pieces, you are going to have very different players that have different understandings of that specific disorder overall. So I think especially for that initial dialogue to gain understanding, and they help to also determine, I think pieces when you talk about the student, but also talk about the environment, like you said, that could impact what is impacting the student's ability to process those pieces. Another key component that very often I will do for teams when you're going through that process of developing an actual trial, and I think this might be what you're talking about, but really putting together if the team determines that, yep, we're going to move forward. We have all decided we need to try assistive technology of this particular student, and we're going to try, X, Y, and Z as the different tools during the course of the trial. Um, I have lot of people do an implementation plan, and it sounds very, very basic, and the information covered is very, very basic, but it really does the job of clearly defining who's going to set this up. If this breaks and doesn't work, who's the person responsible? Who is going to check in, at the end of every week to see how things are moving forward with the student. So it really defines a lot of like those pieces that are needed during the trial and who is the person responsible. Because like you said, when you have larger teams, different roles do kind of overlap, or people assume one person's doing one thing and the other person is when actually no one is because they're so like everyone's world is so busy. Um, I think that implementation plan for the course of the trial when teams are trying is something that's a critical component.
Thank you. That's really helpful. The other question I had that I had wanted to enter in was assistive technology and transition. So all the transition stuff is rather newer, but that's been some of the conversations we've been having is like, well, if we start this, can we finish the training before he transitions out? Or, once we leave here, we're not responsible for this anymore.
So you're talking out as in exiting public education.
Yes. So like when he finishes, like one of our other concerns is like he uses a remote mic system. What does it look like afterwards, or how do you transition into other scenarios with tech? Like, so if he uses this all the time and he'll need it for work, we're kind of been asking those questions like, what does it look like, or what next steps do we take with the tech that he's like built into his school day and extend
Hmm.
it out?
Out into that environment. And that's something too, with depending upon, so I'm assuming you've had like at some of the IEP meetings like DHS or other
We're
outside.
so we're just starting that.
Okay.
But I will say like district wise, I don't know their level of like familiar with all of it. So we've brought up a lot of questions where they're like, we have to get back to you on that. We don't know. So like not to badmouth them, but they really don't know on a lot of things. So we're kind of in this area where like, let's do some research, let's be proactive, to work together to figure it out. But there's
Hmm.
a lot of those answers just waiting for.
A couple of the things that I would look at, and I don't know if like employment or attending classes at the collegiate level or like, because it really is varied based upon environment. That kids go into when they're exiting public education and also the level of services that they're receiving from other outside adult agencies. Um, but I know if there's anything relative to the collegiate level, whether it be a community college or any outside schooling, I always tell folks make sure that everything that the child's currently using is very clearly documented in that IEP. Not that they will take and implement that IEP at the collegiate level, but when they look at providing access to things that special services does definitely use that as a reference to historically what has been that educational need so that the student then therefore can go and put that plan together with their counselor and know what to ask for if they're taking classes. And I really think some other outside organizations too can also help with that piece in regard to employment. So there should be things relative and resources relative to some of those outside agencies um, that can help get some of that assistive technology into place and some of those other pieces too. Because I know when kids move out of public education, it does really become a big game changer in having them know how to advocate for what they need and explain to their employer and all those other pieces as well. So, um, there have been a couple curriculums even for students that are in high school or in transition programs. I know there is one through Dan Cochran at UIC. It's an actual curriculum that focuses on advocacy and planning for post-secondary environments and circumstances. Again, that's a question with a lot of moving pieces too, that really depends on is your child ending this spring or do they have another year after?
They they have another year.
Okay.
So we're trying to figure out which is why I was so happy about this today. Even when you said like needing the description, I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to go through because I know we're in that position of there's a lot of things built into his day. And we're hoping he'll be college level, like higher functioning. So we're kind of looking at it like now, like, okay, this is the document he's going to present to somebody else, but they've built so much into his day, we're not sure that the language is in the document anymore.
Okay, so like a lot of it's part of like almost universal resources in the classroom. It might not be listed as assistive technology, even though for him it's assistive technology.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So yes,
And like even in the descriptions, like some of the stuff they put, I don't know if it like you were saying, like should define the need, like how it meets the need. And I was like, oh, thinking to myself, like, oh, I know it's not there. But assistive technology is definitely something we struggle with. And I could give the example of like he's at a third grade writing level and he's at, curriculum curriculum level courses. Like that's a huge access issue. And
yeah.
I would say assistive technology would be a huge benefit moving into college to bridge that gap.
Yeah, and I would say definitely if that's the case, start working with the team to identify those tasks that if there's other things that are needed or not documented, the tasks where those discrepancies are happening, so they could start that assistive technology, like that decision-making process now, and kind of starting that dialogue. And then there is I'm going to stop sharing and I'm actually going to put another website um, that has some other resources that focuses more in depth on that post-secondary component as well.
And then with your program, you were mentioning like the students can do training. Like, can they try or learn about things that might help them through your program? So, like, if the school isn't implementing, or if the team decided they didn't want to start an assistive technology, but he identifies that he needs supports, is there a way outside of school that he could self-advocate or learn about the available programs?
At this point, our primary role is that we provide services to the districts.
Okay.
So we have tools that, like, we have done student-based training. So we have done trainings. We haven't done any, I think, for the past 2 years, which is interesting, but it is something that we do offer, in which we work with students to show them like different accessibility features on devices so they can learn how to access those things as well. Our assessment base really is focused in on teaching the school team part of that assistive technology decision-making process. So we really do it's more specific to the education of that school team as well. So we don't do like any separate or individual, unfortunately, pieces with that.
Is it something that a parent could request to make the connection to facilitate
I
intervention
mean,
with a student?
you can without question, you can request in general to the school that you would like to have an assistive technology evaluation.
Okay.
So that's something you can I mean, you could request overall. So they can say you could request an outside evaluation, but they will find the people that they will help that will match their needs to go through that process.
Okay. For assistive technology evaluations, when you ask for it, do you have to just ask for a generalized assistive technology evaluation, or do you have to say, I want an evaluation in specific areas or related to a specific need in the IEP? Do you have to tie it back?
Well, okay. Typically, what ends up happening is most people do tie it back. When you, as a parent, advocate for that, you may want to make a statement sharing what you observed as a discrepancy in the home environment. So then the school team can, you know what I'm saying, to kind of channel like, oh, you're noticing blah, 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 is having difficulty completing writing assignments. I would like to move forward and, request an assistive technology evaluation to explore a similar area. There really isn't any like have tos. It's more along the line of you do have that parental right and those things to request that.
Okay.
So, and I'm going to share with you too, within our Illinois Assistive Technology Guidance Manual, it does outline more specifically in the FAQ section about requesting outside evaluations and those pieces. And then the other resource, I am going to share when you're looking at older students, and I don't know, it's so hard to say what works and what doesn't without knowing more specific information. I'm looking to see too. Quiet PS is a curriculum that focuses on providing more instruction, more thought really on those that post-secondary setting. I'm not having luck. Hold on. Can I do it in the Q&A, Megan?
You can, or you can put it in chat and I can copy it.
Okay, for some reason. Oh, there it goes.
There you go.
Yay. So that might be an avenue, and it really is more teaching students how to think about that post-secondary setting and assistive technology. And then the other, I'm looking for the other. How do you know it? How do you show it? That other guide. Doing a quick little search to see if it's coming up.
It's exactly when you need it the most, and it's definitely not going to come up. It's
I
just
know,
the way.
that's what I'm like. I have it, and I usually link it in. And it is honestly like it's it's old school. I'm not gonna lie. Like it is one of these old school, but they have very basic, easy to interpret, factual information. And really was created by some of like the founding leaders in our field. Like, so I always, and I mean it's one of the gals who wrote our Illinois Assistive Technology Manual. I mean, must have put this together like a very long time ago. And she laughs, and I'm like, yeah, we still use it because it has really good information for teams that's very easy for them to take and implement. It's not, I mean, that's what the beauty is in the simplicity. And I'm
Yeah.
not going to be able to find it to save my life right now because it's that old. And I don't like giving out old data or
We
research.
can always send out the recording and any links you send me to the whole group of registrants because you had 30 registrants. So I know we always have folks at the last minute who can't be here, but we could send it out to everybody.
Okay, that would be perfect if I could send it to you. And Julie, if I will put it in there for you. But for some reason, you are welcome to email me if it doesn't go through or it's needed.
Thank you, much appreciated.
So any other comments, questions?
I don't see
Okay.
anything more in Q&A.
Okay. So I
Thank you.
think that will wrap anything up. Is there anything else that you needed going forward besides that last link, Megan?
No, but I do want to remind everybody that Samantha will be back with us. Or Samantha, are you going to do it, or is that going
And
to be?
Jen's going to do
Yeah,
the next
that's
one. Yep.
but in 2 weeks, I believe it's the 28th. My memory is going to be tested right now. But
Mm.
keep an eye out. You'll see that advertised as well. We'd love to have you. And this we will send out to all the registrants the slides and the recording, if that's okay with Samantha, as well as any links that she sends us, so that you'll have access to that. And please reach out with questions, or if you don't receive that, let me know.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for having me, Megan.
Thank
And thanks
you.
to those that attended.
Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.